Welcome back into the Nick Sainert Show. Once again, Nick Sainert Show on YouTube. Somewhat new, somewhat fresh. Obviously, make sure you drop a like, a subscribe on the YouTube. Second guest that I want to bring in here, Mike Schaefer of 247 Sports, Husker 247 Sports. Schaefer, appreciate you doing this, man. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. You were talking there, and I was just thinking, I never invite anyone to like or subscribe. I should probably do that. That's
Oh, well,
probably a smart thing to do if you're in the interest of building an audience, getting people to come back, getting people to enjoy your work.
well,
That's good on you. I should probably change my tune on that.
I think I'm still getting used to it. I'm used to on the sports radio side of it. Obviously saying, text into the show. This is obviously those shows are podcasted too, but this one is basically all in podcast form. So people need to like and subscribe. Just do what Schaefer said. Also make sure you check out his stuff over at Husker 247. All right, Schaefer, head of Colorado, Nebraska and Colorado, obviously tomorrow night, 6:30 p.m. kickoff on Saturday evening. Let's talk official visitor list, or not official visitor, but visitor list rather. It's a pretty big one, and there's some pretty big names on there. Is this the biggest one that Nebraska's had in recent memory, or which one? Where does this kind of stack up in terms of the level of talent, the number of guys that they're bringing to campus this weekend?
Yeah, this feels like a pretty big one. Certainly bigger than any game I can think of last year in terms of who's here and sort of the 2026s and 27s you have the opportunity to host that are from the region. And then you've got, four pretty big 2025 recruits, two committed elsewhere, two uncommitted. All four have taken official visits to Nebraska already. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a big one. I've spent a lot of the week trying to think of if there's a comparable game, and there's really not, because the way that visits are being used and official visits are being used now that they can take the official visits during their junior year or in the summer, like in June, you just don't have it the same way. I mean, we were kind of reminiscing about some of the other games prior to starting the recording here, but the closest I can think of would be maybe like 2019 Ohio State. But even then, I think you were still doing your official visits. That might have been the first year where they could come in the spring, perhaps. So it's just a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. But you have some really kind of exciting names that Nebraska fans should know about here.
That 2019 Ohio State game obviously didn't go great for the Huskers. That was the year that Game Day visited. I think I was not to age myself or tell people how maybe young I am. That was a freshman in college in 2019 for Nebraska, Ohio State in Game Day. So that I think Ohio State wins 48-7 that week. But I guess on that point, if Nebraska is able to get a win, how much does that factor into decision making when you're talking to these guys on the road?
I think it's pretty big, mostly for the win is way bigger for the 2025 guys than it probably is for the 2026s or some of the others. In large part because you have guys like Christian Jones, the Omaha West Side linebacker. I think he wants to see Nebraska win a meaningful game and set themselves up. Because if you think about it, a guy like that last saw Nebraska have a winning season when he was 10. So, that's a long time ago. When I was 10, Nebraska won a national championship, I'm pretty sure. So, it's a very different era of growing up in the state. And he's not someone who considers himself a Nebraska football fan necessarily. But the Huskers by far have recruited him the hardest, I think, of any of the other programs. He's got guys like Caleb Benning and a number of other former teammates that are on this Nebraska roster. I think he's got a very good and close relationship with Tony White and Rob Dvorak. So this all makes it seem like, okay, why hasn't Christian Jones committed yet? Because he wants to see him win. He wants to see him actually go and do the thing that you want out of your college football team. He doesn't care about the atmosphere, though I think he'll enjoy it on Saturday. I don't think that he is someone that's going to get caught up on the fact that Dylan Raiola is at Nebraska now, though that certainly aids in your efforts of winning. I think he just wants to see him win football games. And so I had a conversation with people that would know about sort of where Nebraska was at in terms of Christian Jones. And they reiterated to me, if Nebraska takes care of business in their non-conference and gets off to a decent start this year, Christian's going to commit to them. If they lose to Colorado, or, they would have lost to UTEP, or if they lose this next week to Northern Iowa, it kind of changes things. And so, Christian's sort of unique because he's a local guy. But then you extrapolate that out. Michael Terry III, he's not committed anywhere yet. He's looking at Texas, Oregon. They have huge NIL operations. They more or less can print cash for the recruits that they want to go after. They both have fantastic lists of commitments at wide receiver already. And then he's looking at Nebraska, and you're like, okay, so what is it about Nebraska that he likes? It's the opportunity. He has a chance to get on the field, a lot faster. And then it's the guy throwing the football. And so in that case, Dylan Raiola, really big deal for somebody like Michael Terry, a 5-star recruit. And then Matt Rule and this staff have been recruiting him as long as anybody. They got there before Texas. They got there before Texas A&M. Oregon and Nebraska offered in the same day of January of 2023. He was one of the first, early offers that Matt Rule and that staff had made. They believed in his athleticism. Obviously, Rule's success at Baylor made him a known name. So they have a lot of different things that they can play off of. But a win on Saturday night in a big atmosphere and a quarterback like Dylan Raiola that shows that he can sling the ball around the yard, that's going to help with Michael Terry. And then you've got the two committed guys. You have Cortez Mills, another wide receiver. Just about everything I said about Michael Terry is similar for Mills. I think he's going to want to see, what Nebraska actually does on offense. Can Dylan Raiola move the ball? And then he's going to see you have two senior wide receivers. These guys want to play early. They don't want to go somewhere and sit. And so I think Nebraska can really pitch opportunity with some of these receivers. Then you've got Dawson Merritt. He's kind of the big name in the spring cycle, visited for the red-white game. It came down to Nebraska and Alabama. New look Alabama of Kalen DeBoer. They were able to win out. But it's one of those things where I feel like the people around Dawson view Nebraska as his best option, whereas maybe he was a little more enamored with Alabama and kind of the position they wanted him to play. As this had played out and the way Nebraska started their season, it's not surprising that Dawson Merritt's on this visit list either. He's coming up from 2.5 hours away in suburban Kansas City. His dad's a defensive backs coach for the Chiefs. If he were to go to Nebraska, they have a far better chance of seeing their son play, in a routine manner versus if he's at Alabama trying to get to those games and then also be at your NFL contest the next day. That's going to be relatively difficult. So I think Nebraska has some avenues with these 2025 guys where, honestly, Nick, it wouldn't shock me if they could get 2, maybe in some cases 3 of them. It would be shocking if they went 4 for 4. If we're looking back on this in December and Nebraska goes 4 for 4, I think they had a hell of a season. They probably have a hell of a recruiting class.
Mike Schaefer of Husker 247Sports joining me on the Nick Sanders Show. Make sure you like, subscribe. Make sure you leave a comment as well. We'll try to get to a couple of them after the show. I guess, Schaefer, when you look at, we talk so much about guys are able to take official visits now in the spring, right? And I remember when Dylan Raiola was getting recruited, I think this was prior to him committing to Georgia. He visited for that big weekend in March, and it was a very popular weekend for guys to visit. Now here we are in the fall where a lot of guys want to get their decisions out of the way before their start of their season a lot of the times. So maybe not so much with David Sanders. I don't want to go back and revisit that. But with Michael Terry and especially, a guy like Christian Jones for that matter, what does it say about Nebraska and their staff, I suppose, that they're able to get guys of that caliber onto campus? It has to be something like they're seriously considering Nebraska at some point.
Well, I think they've done a nice job, obviously, reaching those guys on a personal level. I think that's the biggest thing that Nebraska does is that they recruit to the person. They want to make sure it's someone they want as part of their operation, and then they want them to feel like, hey, if I actually come to Nebraska, these are guys that are going to care about me. These are coaches that are going to care about me. And then I think the other thing you have to do is you have to keep them interested. You have to keep them like, okay, what about going to Nebraska, Colorado is going to be different for me, Michael Terry, instead of going to Texas and Michigan or going to, whatever it is. I think that game's at Michigan, so he probably isn't able to go. But you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Why do I want to spend the weekend in Lincoln? What is it that I want to see? Well, I think in Michael Terry's case, it's the atmosphere. It's the opportunity to be in a big game environment and to be around a staff that excites him, to see an offense that he could potentially play for. So I think you have to line everything up just kind of nicely. And one of the big things Nebraska is going for, and one of the reasons why I think they're going to have these types of visit weekends year in and year out, they got a head coach who cares about recruiting. They got a head coach who knows the value of recruiting. They got a head coach who doesn't mind getting on the phone and making those recruiting calls. They got a head coach who doesn't mind calling back recruits that reach out to him. I mean, I think that it's the same, Steve Sarkisian's that way in Texas. Dan Lanning's that way. And like, if you're a head coach in a major college football operation anymore, you have to at least pay the lip service to recruiting. The days of just being the closer or coming in at the end or doing whatever it is, what you used to be able to do. I just think that's gone. You've got to be actively involved in it. And Rule is as active as probably any head coach in America.
Actively involved, I think, is a important piece. And this is just kind of a side note. I go back to when I was at Big Ten Media Days in July. I was alongside Dan Lanning, and he was asked, why is this a popular time, or why is this a fun and enjoyable time when you tell recruits about college football, why they should come to Oregon? And he goes, I think this is the best time ever to be a college athlete. And he listed and rambled on about the reasons why, and obviously NIL at Oregon is part of that. But I remember standing there a couple of feet away going, this guy gets it. Like, there's certainly coaches that, and Matt Rule, I think, falls in this category, that just understand, like, you know what, even if you don't at its core enjoy where college football may be heading or currently is, you have to embrace it or you're going to be a failure and you're not going to be coaching in college football for very much longer.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest assets in the toolbox for a coach right now is being an effective communicator. I mean, I think, you get so many opportunities. And we see this with Matt Rule, and he did it again on Thursday, evoking a very Nebraska sporting event of Bud Crawford and Errol Spence. And, that fight had been built up for years, like absolutely built up for years. And these two guys have finally get the opportunity to face each other. And, Rule sizes it up as Bud Crawford picks his spots, waits for the opportunity, and then just dominates. And so what he's saying is he wants his team to not, effectively just waste all of your punches being so excited coming out of the gate. Like it's a 4-quarter game. You got to have that mentality. And he's just a good communicator in that sense. Like we have witnessed coaches previously that aren't particularly effective communicators or aren't going to utilize the media to get their message across or whatever it is. And it's just, I think it's a key part of the skill set. Like I don't think you can be a good coach in 2024 if all you do is work the grease board. Like you can be a great coordinator. Coordinators don't necessarily have to be the guys that get up front and handle everything. But Nebraska's kind of blessed. You got a guy in Matt Rule who's effective at it. I think Tony White's effective at it. I know that he's never going to be the most popular guy in the state, but I think Marcus Satterfield gives a good presentation and press conference as well. So, and I think some of that is a learned skill from learning and watching what Matt Rule does too.
We're joined by Mike Schaefer of Husker 247. A couple more before we go ahead and let you go here, Schaefer, ahead of a very busy weekend, I'm sure, for you guys covering the recruiting trail of things. I had this thought earlier in the week, and I kind of just want to get your thoughts on it overall. It's not necessarily a recruiting piece of it. I suppose it is mentioning that Michael Terry, wants to see atmosphere and things like that. And Nebraska fans are going to make that place ruckus on Saturday night. But I was thinking, with the current deal for the Big Ten Conference and its member schools, if they have an A+ game, you don't get it very often at nighttime, right? Like we talk about it lines up perfectly that Colorado is a non-conference opponent. There's so much steam with Dion obviously going on throughout the offseason. The quarterback duel between Raiola and Shadur, it lines up perfectly, like you said, for a big recruiting weekend, because whether it was an 11 a.m. kick or a 2:30, it's going to be a pretty good environment. It always is at Nebraska. But you think of the night games the last couple of years, it's been like Northern Illinois, and it's been those types of non-conference games. Northern Iowa is the 6:30 kick as well. It really lines up perfectly for a big opportunity for Nebraska this Saturday, being it against Colorado, an opponent like that, but also a night game, because obviously we know what Memorial Stadium can look like under the lights.
And that's why the coaching staff had to completely go hard for this weekend. I mean, I think that going all the way back into the spring, you had guys coming in for the official visits. You do the usual, what's going to happen with you in Nebraska going forward. They're like, oh man, I want to come back for a game. I already talked to them about the Colorado game. Like they were,
Yeah.
even before they knew the time, you had to get that out there because if you do get the right time, and they sure did, the 6:30 start on NBC under the lights, your colleague, your coworker there over downtown at 93.7, Bill Bush. I mean, he commented a couple weeks ago to me just like how perfect it was that it all came
Yeah.
together this way. I mean, you just don't, he's been part of that where you have what you want to be a big weekend, and then you're stuck with the 11 a.m. kick, and you're here in Lincoln, and you're just not going to get a lot of recruits in at 11 a.m. But a 6:30 kick, those guys can get in early enough. They can go through the car wash of the visit and all of that. You can get some time, FaceTime early with them in the day as a coaching staff. It's kind of the perfect thing, and so you can't waste it. And they couldn't waste it from a getting guys in town perspective. And they also know they really don't want to waste it in terms of an opportunity to win a game, create some memories, and create some buzz, create some positive conversation about Nebraska football.
The most, I mean, and it's not necessarily surprising, just kind of jarring statistic was that they're 1-0 for the first time since 2019.
Yeah.
Like to truly and to
first time they haven't played a conference game in that
is
stretch,
right.
which is worth
That is
mentioning.
right. But still, right? Like you look back and it's not like they've played Ohio State in 2020 every single year.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't been that case. It's been against pretty like-minded and even opponents, I would say. Back to the recruiting trail real quick, couple more. Christian Jones, obviously at the linebacker position. You look ahead to Nebraska next season. Obviously, the transfer portal is something there, but especially at the linebacker position, primarily inside linebacker, it seems like that might be a position of need going forward for Nebraska. This might be just a silly question. How valuable is getting Christian Jones in the fold? Not only because the in-state stuff, but from a depth standpoint and roster construction going forward.
Yeah, if you look at the way the class has been constructed, the biggest glaring missing piece is that inside linebacker. And they have their top two guys in this weekend in Dawson Merritt and Christian Jones. And so I think they would love to get one or both of those guys in their class because you're going to have some playing time opportunity there. Now, they're excited about what they have in Vincent Shavers. They're excited about what they have with Mekhi Bayer. Those guys should theoretically be back, for 2025. And they might, be able to go into the portal and get another linebacker. But I think this is a team that wants to be a developmental program. They want to get the Dawson Merritts and Christian Jones in as freshmen so they can grow them at their rate. They can put the weight on how they want. They can build those bodies, and they can turn those guys loose when they're ready. Whether that means they're playing 4 games or playing 13 games as a freshman is entirely up to how they show up and how they learn and everything else. But the staff isn't afraid to play young guys. You put yourself in the position to play, they're going to play you. There's no question about that. And so, if you're Christian Jones and you're Dawson Merritt and you see John Bullock isn't going to be back, and you know that Stephon Thompson isn't going to be back, and Javen Wright likely isn't going to be back, there's opportunity there in that inside linebacker room. And so, Nebraska's not going to – they're certainly going to be selling that when they have those conversations. No doubt about it.
When you look outside on this visitor list, outside the big names, outside the Cortez, the Michael Terrys, and so on and so forth, who's one that kind of sticks out to you? That's like, and I hate to kind of put you on the spot here, but when you look at the visitor list, who is one that you go, okay, yeah, this is a guy that may be under the radar, but it's also potentially commit watch, if you will.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up the list, so I'm not just doing this off the top of my head. You got a guy in Hunter Higgins who's coming from Wichita. That's a defensive lineman that Nebraska was supposed to have up at the end of July, and he wasn't able to make the visit. So I think it's good that they're able to get him back. I mean, a lot of it is they have some interesting regional guys. I mean, you have Hudson Parliament coming from South Dakota, Brandon, South Dakota. You got J.J. Dunnigan coming from Manhattan. Parliament's an defensive lineman or an offensive lineman, probably a defensive lineman. And then, Dunnigan's a cornerback. You've got a running back and Zephin Walker. I mean, there's a lot of intriguing guys in that sense. You got some local guys, Jace Reynolds, Isaac Jensen, 2 of your top guys in 2026. if they have a great time this weekend, let's just say Nebraska can't start getting commitments for the future cycle right now. Why do they have to wait until the middle of March to start adding some of these players? So I think that's kind of the idea. And you said some further down. This guy is I rattled off those first four as kind of the top of the list. This guy would be like number one most weeks. Jackson Cantwell is a 2026 5-star offensive lineman whose mom grew up in Crete. His dad is a world-renowned thrower of the shot put and the discus. Jackson is 6'7". He is wanted by every school in the country. He is he is a cornerstone left tackle or tackle. I mean, I don't know if he's going to be right or left. I would assume left, but you never know what some programs are going to do. I mean, he's a cornerstone on your offensive line. Everybody wants this kid. He's coming to Nebraska. I think this is like the 5th or 6th time since Rule staff has been there. He loves Donovan Raiola. The family connection is there. Can they pull him away from everybody else that wants him? It starts this weekend. Like, you go and you get a big win and you really kind of put that pelt on the wall and he gets to be here for it and he comes back later in the year. I mean, so Jackson Cantwell, you were talking some further down guys. He's further down on this list. On most lists, he takes a backseat to no one.
That's truly remarkable because you mentioned earlier, and this is before we get you out of here, you mentioned a couple that if Nebraska could get away from those bigger names, not including Cantwell in this case, the bigger names of Michael Terry, and my mind's drawing a blank right now, but you know who I'm referring to.
Cortez Mills and Dawson Merritt.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Those four. If you said 2, potentially 3, if we look back in December and go 4 for 4, it's spectacular. What if you had to pick the 3 or the 2 that you're comfortable with? Who are they?
I think their best chance are to get both of those inside linebackers. Like, if they're going to get multiple, if you were ranking them right now, Christian Jones is 1, Dawson Merritt is 2, and then after that, I might go Michael Terry 3 and Cortez Mills 4. But here's the thing about being a wide receiver. When you get to see Dylan Raiola and the ball and it's coming out of his hands the way that it was against UTEP, if he's doing that against Colorado, that has to be, I mean, we all see what it's like. I'm a Vikings fan. Sam Darnold is going to be throwing a ball to Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson publicly has to just, laud Sam Darnold at every opportunity.
Yes.
But he's not picking Sam Darnold if he gets to pick where he's going to play. These guys get to pick who their quarterback is going to be. So when your quarterback is Dylan Raiola, that gives you such a leg up in these recruitments. And, with a guy like Cortez Mills and Michael Terry, they have great options. I mean, Oklahoma has quarterbacks. Texas has quarterbacks. Oregon has quarterbacks. But are they Dylan Raiola? We don't know.
There you have it. Mike Schaefer, Husker 247 Sports. Schaefer, appreciate the time as always, man. Always good to chop it up, catch up with you, and appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you soon, man.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Nick. Appreciate it.
There he is.
Like Mike and Schaefer, subscribe, Husker. Folks.
Yes.
Like
Mike
and
Schaefer.
Subscribe.
The official testament and signage of Mike Schaefer on the Nick Sanders Show. Like and subscribe, Husker 24/7 as always. Appreciate Schaefer coming on. All right, we'll talk to you next time on the Nick Sanders Show. Make sure you like and subscribe, just like Schaefer said. Talk to you next week after the Colorado game.